John Dutton's successful election as the governor of Montana brings mixed reactions. Among those displeased are Jamie, his adopted son and attorney general, who also contested for the governorship, and Caroline Warner from Market Equities. Caroline enlists Sarah Atwood, a businesswoman, to manipulate Jamie and position him as governor instead of John. During a conversation with Linnell Perry, John's predecessor and now a U.S. Senator, John reveals he became governor to protect Yellowstone. He doesn't trust Jamie to handle the responsibility. Linnell admits she'd have preferred Jamie, who she could control, but now must work with John. Meanwhile, at the U.S.-Canada border, Kayce Dutton leads livestock agents to capture horse thieves. As this unfolds, John is sworn in as Montana's governor. His first actions include canceling Market Equities' deal for Paradise Valley and increasing taxes for non-residents. On the way home, Jamie advises John to reconsider, but John refuses, stating he ran for governor to protect the ranch and Montana's land. During the swearing-in party, Rip and Beth discuss John's governorship. Rip worries that John becoming governor might ultimately result in losing Yellowstone. Kayce successfully retrieves the stolen horses and calls Monica, his pregnant wife. He learns she's in labor and agrees to have an ambulance meet her halfway to the hospital. Tragically, Monica and their son Tate get into a car accident. While Monica and Tate survive, they lose the baby. Intent on maintaining control, John fires his current chief of staff, replacing them with Beth. Jamie continues to warn John about the consequences of canceling the lease of Yellowstone to Market Equities. Linnell supports Jamie, but Beth sides with John. After leaving the office, Linnell cautions John that his inability to compromise could lead to his downfall. Beth later confronts Jamie, warning him not to question their father and reminding him he's not truly part of the family. Back at the ranch, Rip discovers wolves have attacked one of the cattle. He instructs the cowboys to hunt and kill the wolves while the others return the cattle. In the city, John holds a press conference to announce the cancellation of Yellowstone's lease to Market Equities. In response, Caroline decides to sue the state for breach of contract, and Sarah begins her plan to manipulate Jamie. To secure the ranch's future, John considers placing the land under a conservation easement, limiting its use and preventing Market Equities from implementing their plans. Later, Ryan and the cowboys kill the wolves but discover they belong to the state's pack due to GPS collars. Rip advises them to attach the collars to wood and float them down the river. Unfortunately, one collar gets stuck in the Yellowstone River. Two agents from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service later visit Rip, informing him they found the wolf's GPS collar in the river. Rip denies ever seeing any wolf on the land but agrees to assist them in running a search. At Kayce's house, Monica and her husband have agreed to hold their baby's funeral in Yellowstone. However, since Monica is an Indian, they have Thomas Rainwater, chairman of the Confederated Tribes of Broken Rock and leader of the Broken Rock Indian Reservation, and M.O., a member of the tribal police, over to discuss the traditional procedure for the funeral, part of which involves burying the baby with a horse that will take him through the afterlife. Sarah and Market Equities attorney Ellis Steele visit Jamie to file their suit against the state. As they discuss, Jamie disagrees with Ellis on a few points, and the attorney seemingly leaves furiously. To resolve their differences, Sarah and Jamie agree to have dinner together later on. Kayce visits his father to ask permission to bury his baby at the ranch. Upon receiving it, he hands over his badge as a livestock agent, explaining that he wants to focus on his family now. Elsewhere on the ranch, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agents are unsuccessful in learning more about the wolves because Rip has cleverly had the land where they were found and killed plowed. Rip returns home while the officers track the GPS trail to the Yellowstone River. Meanwhile, Beth successfully sells her controlling interest in Schwartz and Meyer to Robert, one of Market Equities' competitors. To prevent being sued by Market Equities, Beth puts the company in a conservation easement, effectively sending Caroline back to New York. Afterward, she goes out with her husband and the cowboys to celebrate Lloyd's birthday. While celebrating, she assaults a lady who flirts with her husband openly but gets arrested when the lady presses charges. State park officials and agents of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service visit John, and he learns about the wolf collar found on his land and the environmental parties who want answers. Placing a call to Rip, John confirms that there hasn't been a wolf sighting on his land. As soon as they leave, John receives a call from Jamie and learns of Beth's predicament. Finding himself in a crisis, he asks Clara, his secretary, about his crisis management team, but she reminds him he never employed one. Afterward, John meets with Linnell and tells her about Beth. Linnell tells him he can grant her a pardon if she's convicted but advises against it. When he tells her about the environmental group, Linnell admonishes him to steer clear of them and advises hiring an environmental advisor to help him understand them. Hell-bent on keeping Beth out of jail, Jamie gets the lady who pressed charges to back down by accusing her of instigating the fight since she knew Rip was Beth's husband and still flirted with him. Jamie drives Beth home when she's released, but along the way, she discovers he has a son and becomes angry and hurt. She blames Jamie for the botched abortion that destroyed her womb years ago and promises to take his son away from him. She then gets out of the car and gets a lift home. Following Linnell's advice, John makes Summer, an environmental activist and his former lover, his environmental advisor. Meanwhile, things take a different turn during Sarah and Jamie's dinner date, and they make out in the restroom. Beth, who's been following Jamie because she wants to know what he's up to, follows them into the restroom, finds Sarah's bag outside, and takes a picture of her ID. Upon getting home, she runs Sarah's name through a search engine and discovers the name is false. Beth wakes up on the wrong side of the bed as she reminisces about the pain of losing her womb and talks to her husband about it. Meanwhile, John starts working from the ranch because of the cattle branding he has scheduled for the week. He tells Clara to cancel scheduled meetings and appointments and keep his schedule as free as possible. He also intends to host a party around branding so people can see what he does. However, Clara cleverly suggests that he invite prominent people to the event and save himself 2 weeks of meetings after the branding. After that, John and Beth hold a conversation about Summer, whom Beth doesn't like, but John insists he needs her for her environmental savvy. Meanwhile, Monica convinces her husband not to abandon his job as a livestock agent and gets him to attend the branding. That night during dinner, Summer, who's a vegetarian, takes offense at the meal, which consists mostly of meat. Annoyed by her antics, Beth asks her to meet outside, and Summer agrees. While John and the rest of the family continue eating, Rip, a little concerned about what his wife will do, joins the women outside, only to find them already fighting. With a better idea in mind, Rip steps in, stops the fight, and suggests that if both women really want to fight, they take turns punching each other until one concedes defeat. The women take up his suggestion, and ultimately, Summer concedes defeat. Afterward, they return to the table to finish dinner. The next morning, after breakfast, Beth heads out with the cowboys to gather the cattle for branding, leaving Monica and Summer behind. When Immo sees a military helicopter fly over his house, he follows it and figures out that the President of the United States is coming to Broken Rock. Meanwhile, Jamie and Sarah are now in a relationship. Though Jamie experiences doubts from time to time about the possibility of being used, Sarah adeptly crushes those doubts. Back at Yellowstone, John and his cowboys gather the cattle and camp out for the night. Unfortunately, the next morning, John learns his friend Emmett, who was also there for the branding, died in his sleep. John tasks Rip with leading the cattle and everyone else back to the ranch, while he asks Clara to send in a chopper to take Emmett's body. When John and Clara return to the ranch on horseback, he delivers the news to Emmett's wife and consoles her. Afterward, the branding begins. Not long after, Linnell shows up, informing John that the president is in Broken Rock. However, John isn't enthusiastic about meeting the president and continues with the branding. He later walks up to Summer, has a small chat about the event, and asks her for a dance. When she turns him down, he asks Linnell instead, and she agrees. Meanwhile, Jamie and Sarah watch the news announcing Emmett's death. The press explains that John's decision not to meet with the president is tied to his choice to stay and mourn his late friend, giving him a heroic and loyal image. Jamie notes that John would be hard to beat in a fair fight due to his old-fashioned charisma, but Sarah suggests it would be wise not to let John show up for the fight. During their conversation, Jamie tells Sarah that John forced him to become a lawyer when all he wanted was to be a cowboy. Now, Jamie believes John hates him for doing the very thing John forced him to do. In turn, Sarah tells Jamie that John fears developing the ranch, which might be its downfall. She suggests she can help save the ranch. Back at the Dutton ranch, Beth opens up to Monica about the loss of her own child during a costly abortion in the past and asks her sister-in-law to keep it discreet. During a visit, Linnell informs Thomas Rainwater and Imo that the natural gas and captured carbon pipelines approved in central Montana by the Department of the Interior will run through their reservation, directly under their drinking water reservoir. Linnell tells them she opposes the move and advises Thomas to do the same, warning that Angela, who's been gunning to remove Thomas as chairman, could use it against him. Trouble visits the ranch when John discovers one of the cattle has been killed by a disease called brucellosis. After testing their cattle and finding nothing, John explains to Clara that the entire herd could be destroyed by the state if one animal gets infected. Since the infected animal died where John hoped to graze the branded cattle, he tells Beth they might have to lease land for a year, which infuriates her because it could ruin them financially. Sarah informs Jamie that John put Yellowstone under a conservation easement, and Jamie, angered, becomes receptive to her suggestion of suing John and requesting his impeachment. Later that night, during a fair, Rip tells Beth he will be gone for a year as John has successfully secured the lease for the cattle's grazing spot. Meanwhile, Jamie rehearses his speech for a press conference where he plans to sue John. As the cowboys and cattle leave the ranch, John tasks Kayce with watching over Yellowstone. John then heads to Broken Rock for Thomas's press conference regarding the pipelines. Unbeknownst to him, Jamie is presenting his speech in court, accusing John of bankrupting Montana by canceling the pipeline project. Then he proceeds to call for John's impeachment, the first in the state's history. The press conference in Broken Rock is interrupted when news of Jamie's speech reaches them, derailing the primary focus of Thomas's event. John apologizes and leaves. Back at the ranch, they also hear the news, and an infuriated Beth storms over to Jamie. She hits him with a rock and threatens to expose pictures of him killing and disposing of his biological father's corpse unless he retracts his speech. However, Jamie refuses, telling her she can't follow through on her threat because the train station, where he buried his father, is the same place John and his ancestors disposed of the bodies of those who threatened their ranch. Following this revelation, Beth confronts her father. Meanwhile, John, Linnell, and Clara watch the news as he is accused of illegally killing wolves on his ranch. John asks to speak privately with Beth, who questions him about the train station. He confirms its existence, prompting Beth to warn him that Jamie will use everything he knows against them. She then suggests that Jamie should be added to the bodies buried at the train station. Meanwhile, Sarah tends to Jamie's head wound. Jamie decides that to protect himself, he must kill John and Beth, as he strongly suspects they intend to do the same to him. Sarah agrees to help him find mercenaries to carry out the plan. Share your thoughts in comments section. See you in the next one.